Okay, so last week we learned about the ecosystem. What is an ecosystem? So we said the ecosystem is actually the interaction or the relationship between biotic factors and abiotic factors. Before we continue with the next slide, can we review what is biotic factor and what is abiotic factor? Can anybody from the class give a simple description of these two factors?
Sure. Biotic is a living organism while abiotic is a non-living organism.
Okay, thank you very much, Kuya Yuri. That's correct. So in an ecosystem, sabi natin, we have the biotic factors or the organisms that have life. But also in an ecosystem, sabi natin, they are interacting with abiotic factors, meaning they depend and they interact, they form relationships with organisms that don't have life, which is your biotic factors. Yes, Kuya Reynolds.
Leave mo na po ako kasi po nag-error po yung ano ko po, yung Zoom ko po. Wait lang muna po
Okay, sige. Join ka na lang ulit sa ating meeting group.
Okay po.
Okay. So now let's continue with our essential question for our lesson this week. So take note of these questions. We will be answering them later as we finish our discussion. So the essential question is, to what extent do changes in abiotic factors affect the ecosystem? So last week we said the abiotic factors, even though they don't have life, they're essential or very important to all living organisms. So for this lesson, we are going to explore, we're going to analyze what kind of changes can we experience to see or can we experience or see in an ecosystem kapag nagkaroon ng changes in the abiotic factors. Can we experience positive changes or can we experience negative changes? Okay, ayan. So let's go back to the idea of a food chain. So sabi natin, the picture here shows a food chain. So first question, and this is more of a review from our last week's lesson. What are the kinds of organisms that are found in this specific food chain? Can anybody share their ideas? Kuya Jared, can you give me one kind of organism that is found in this food chain?
Sure, there is an eagle.
Okay, there is an eagle. And what kind of organism is an eagle?
It is biotic.
What kind of organism is an eagle?
It is a bird.
Okay. We said in an ecosystem, we have different kinds of organisms. We have producers, we have consumers, and we have, anong tawag dito? In consumers, we have the primary consumers, which are usually the herbivores. We have the secondary consumers. We have tertiary consumers.
Teacher, ano siya, consumer?
And we also have decomposer. What kind of consumer is this eagle?
Teacher? Kasi kinakain niya yung snake.
Snake.
Okay, so specifically, it is a tertiary consumer. Is it a herbivore or a carnivore? Or an omnivore?
Carnivore.
Yes, thank you very much for everyone's answer.
Hindi pala siya kumakain ng plant siya. Eagles don't eat greens.
Okay, so ayan, thank you very much for all of your contributions. Ayan, so the eagle here is a carnivore. Yes, it is a tertiary consumer. And how about another organism? Can we classify another organism in the food chain?
Fungi.
Okay, Kadesh.
The fungi, chair. You know.
The fungi, okay. What
mushroom.
kind of organism is this mushroom?
Scavengers? Ah, mali. Decomposers.
Thank you very much. So yes, this mushroom is a decomposer. And as you can see on the description, when the hawk die, while the body is decomposing, the nutrients will be absorbed by the mushroom. Okay, any other person in the class who would like to classify another organism in the food chain? Okay, Kuya Yuri.
The mice, Chair.
Okay, the mice is what kind of organism?
The primary or the secondary consumers.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, the mice here is a secondary consumer because the mice will be eating the grasshopper, which is the primary consumer. What is the producer in this food chain?
The plants.
Okay, so the grass here is the producer. So the producer here will be eaten by the primary consumer, which is the grasshopper. The grasshopper will be eaten by the secondary consumer, which is the mice. The mice will be eaten by the snake, which is another consumer, and then the cycle goes on. Next, what is the order of energy? What is the order of energy transfer in this food chain?
Sure. The sun.
The sun is the first one, followed by
Grass.
Plant.
grass, and then
Grasshopper.
grasshopper, followed by
Vegan.
And the mice.
The mice. And then after the
The
snake.
snake.
after the eagle, after when the hawk dies, fungi breaks the bodies down and turns into nutrients.
And then the nutrients will remain in the soil, which will also be used by the plants to grow. So it is a cycle, it's a continuous cycle. So the energy is just passed along from one organism to the other. But we have to remember that the amount of energy changes, right? How many percentage of energy transfers from one organism to another?
10%.
Yes, so just 10% of the energy is passed along to the next
Chair,
organism in the food chain. Yes, Kadesh.
Chair, saan po nagsisimula, Chair?
It always starts with the sun. All of the energy in our planet comes from the sun. Okay, so you always have to start with the sun. I need to see in your food chain the source of energy which comes.
Pwedeng food web. Yung web, Chair.
It's okay for food webs. To be honest, food chain is easier, but if you really want to create a food web, then that's fine. Okay, so the most amount of energy in this food chain is actually received by the producers, which is your plants. And then 10% of this energy will be transferred to the grasshoppers, 10% will be transferred to the mice, 10% to the snake, 10% to the eagle, and then 10% to the mushroom. So in this
One na lang yung energy sa mushroom, Chair.
food chain, the least amount of energy is actually received by the mushroom. And the producer is the one that receives the most amount of energy. Okay, so hindi pwedeng sobrang laki ng ating food chains. Ang kanyang limit lang is up to 5 levels. In this case, actually 6 levels na siya, so sobra na siya. Number 1 natin is the producer, number 2 yung grasshopper, 3 yung mice, 4 yung snake, 5 yung eagle, and then number 6 na itong mushroom. For the organism to receive enough amount of energy in a food chain, maximum of 5 levels lang. So usually, isang producer, 3 consumer, tapos isang decomposer. Okay? In this case, 4 yung consumer niya, so sobra-sobra na siya. Wala na halos nare-receive yung mushroom na energy in this
Mamatay lang din, Chair.
chain. So, ayan. So, in your food chain, make sure na yung isang cycle will only contain 5 organisms. If you will be having food webs, okay lang. Pero make sure that in your food web, each chain should only have a maximum of 5 organisms to ensure that all of the organisms are receiving sufficient amount of energy as it goes along the food chain. Okay? Ayan. So, next question. What do you think are possible abiotic factors that can be found in this ecosystem? Can anybody share their ideas? So far, the food chain only shows the biotic factors. But what do you think are possible abiotic factors that can be observed in this food chain? Yes, Kadesh?
Sunlight.
Okay, the amount of sunlight. So, if it's sunny, if it's rainy, so pwede yan. Weather. What else?
Wind.
The plant.
Air.
The
Air.
grass.
Air.
Okay, so the air, the cleanliness of the air can also be considered as an abiotic factor. How about the amount of rainfall? Can it be considered as an abiotic factor?
Yes.
No, sir.
Water.
Sige. Sabi ni Kuya Yuri, no. Bakit daw po?
Kasi, sir, water isn't confirmed as a abiotic factor.
Bakit hindi abiotic ang water?
Kasi, sir, kasi, sir, yung water, siya yung namimigay ng energy rin sa, ng cause to grow in plants.
Okay, so it is an abiotic factor. It doesn't have life, but it can somehow affect the growth of these plants. Diba? Kapag too much yung water, there's a possibility that the grass here will die. If the water is not enough, there is also a possibility that the grass will die.
Dehydrate.
Yes. So pagka namatay yung plants or the grasses here because of excessive or insufficient amount of water, then the grasshoppers will starve, and then the mice will starve, the same with the snake, the same with the hawk. So it is affecting the entire food chain just because naapektuhan yung growth of the plants. Diba? When you were creating your own plants, diba? Hindi pwedeng sobra-sobra yung water na ibibigay mo.
Yung sunlight, sir, does it affect
Hindi
sa
naman
mga plants?
konti lang yung water. The same when it comes to sunlight, syempre, you have to remember that your plants need water and sunlight in order to grow yung kanilang maximum potential. So if the sunlight is not enough in that area, for example, naglagay ka ng plant in an area na hindi siya nare-reach ng sunlight, then it will not be growing as much as it can possibly pagka may enough sunlight siya. Okay, so sunlight and water can be considered as abiotic factors. Yes po, of course. Even with water, if there is no sun, then the producer will die because they cannot create their own food through the process of photosystem.
Photosynthesis.
Kuya Yuri, even if you have sun, but you don't have water, the plant will also die. So kailangan your plants should have both water and sunlight in order for them to grow. Kaya nga, di ba, water is also an abiotic factor. Okay? So we can also include yung quality of air or the cleanliness of the air as an abiotic factor. Siyempre, we have eagles here, we have other consumers, and if the air is very polluted, there is also a possibility that the plants and all these consumers will die. So, ayan yung ating idea for today, that even though these abiotic factors, they don't have life, they can affect the life of all the living organisms in our food chain. So, let's try to analyze these certain situations. So, we are still going to focus on the same food chain, but this time, our abiotic factor is the use of fertilizer. Now, do you think that using fertilizer can affect this ecosystem? And if your answer is yes, what kind of effect can you expect to happen in the ecosystem? Will it be a positive effect or will it be a negative effect?
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. In my opinion, there are actually advantage and disadvantage. The advantage is that the grass will grow faster, but the disadvantage is the chemicals of the fertilizer.
Explain more on that.
Okay. Okay. There are some advantages and disadvantages of fertilizers putting in grass. The advantage is that the grass will grow faster, but the disadvantage is that the chemicals of the fertilizer may harm the grasshopper.
Okay, in what way can it harm the grasshopper, Kuya Reynald? Tama yung idea mo. I just want you to explain more on it.
Sure. Sure, it may have some harmful chemicals it may have some harmful chemicals in the fertilizer. It could be possible that the grasshopper may die.
Okay, sige, thank you. Kuya Kadish, you're raising your hand. Do you have additional ideas?
Nasabi na ni Reyna dyan.
Nasabi na ni Reynald. Okay, sige. So yes, the use of fertilizer, especially the amount of fertilizer that we are using and the kind of fertilizer that we are using. You have to remember we have chemical fertilizers. And we also,
Teacher, yung natural, Chair. Can the natural fertilizers, ano?
also have what we call as natural fertilizers. So,
Wait lang. Chair, yung chemicals, di ba siya nakaka-affect din sa soil? Can make it, ano?
would you like
worse?
to add on it, Kuya Kadesh?
Yes, teacher.
Sige,
If
go.
you use chemical fertilizers, the plants will grow faster, but the soil will break down and make cracks, di ba, Chair? Yung pag ganon, and no more grass will grow on the soil.
Okay,
While
thank you.
I just copied my idea.
Sure. I think, Chair, para may naisip na akong sagot, Chair.
Sige, Kuya Yuri.
Sure. If you put a chemical fertilizer on the soil, of course, yes, the plants will grow fast, but the soil will be broken. Like, the water will decrease as fast as the soil is dry, and the animals won't be able to drink water. So possible all the animals in the area might die.
Okay, thank you very much, Kuya Yuri. Thank you din, Kuya Jared. May additional info siya on the chat box. So sabi niya, it can poison the grasshopper and the other animals in the food chain, especially if the, anong tawag dito, the chemical fertilizers will go to the water. It is actually passed on along the food chain. So yes, so sabi natin, the grasses can grow faster because of the fertilizer. Kaya nga, usually, when you are planting plants or if you have a garden, common yon that we use fertilizers. Okay? Pero as much as possible, the amount of fertilizer that we are going to use, especially if it is a chemical fertilizer, should be limited or controlled because, like you said, these are chemicals and the other animals who are eating these grasses, such as the grasshopper or even the mice, they live in these grass areas. They can be affected by these chemical fertilizers. And we know, yes, wait lang and we know that these, if they stay in the soil and then eventually it will rain, the water coming from the rain will now absorb the chemicals on the soil and then it will be passed along to the other animals, and then these chemicals will transfer from the soil going to the sea, going to the ocean. So it will now affect other ecosystems, not just these food chains, but also other ecosystems. So in different countries, we have already seen a lot of lakes and a lot of rivers that were destroyed because of the chemicals that were used in factories and in fertilizers. Okay, so, even though they are non-living organisms, they can affect the lives of these animals in our food chain. So if we are going to use fertilizers as much as possible, it's recommended to use the natural ones. And also make sure that you are using just the enough amount, not too much, okay, so that the effect will be controlled then. Okay, Kuya Reynald, would you like to add some more?
Sure. there's actually one thing that I need to add, and some worms may actually benefit the plant more than the fertilizer.
Okay. So even though the worm is not included in the food chain, eventually it will also be affected by this abiotic factor. Okay, so we have another situation here. Let's go to the next slide. Ayan, so we are still looking at the same food chain, but this time, our abiotic factor is a human activity which we call as the hunting of eagles. In what way do you think it will affect the ecosystem if more people will be hunting eagles? And if there will be an effect, will it be a positive or a negative effect? Okay, can anybody from the class share their answer? Will there be an effect if more people will be hunting eagles? And what kind of effect can we observe in this situation?
Sure, negative.
Okay, for Reynald, it's a negative effect. Can you explain why a negative effect will be observed, Kuya Reynald?
Sure, the reason why that I say it's negative because it's just because without the hawk, the advantages is that the snake will not be eaten by the eagle, and in fact, there won't be any nutrients for the grass.
Okay, thank you very much. Kadish is raising his hand. Can you add additional ideas, Kuya? Kadish, you're on mute.
The species of the eagle chair will, ano tawag din, chair? Will be endangered, extinct or endangered.
Okay.
And the eagles, the species they eat will be manier, such as the snake.
Okay,
It will
and
be
if
manier.
we have more snakes, is it good or bad?
It's bad because
In what way is it bad? Can you give something specific?
if a snake gets manier, it manier, it can
More
bite more people. Bite more people.
bite talaga. Sige. So yes, if we have more people who are going to hunt these eagles, there is a possibility that they will be endangered or extinct. And if they are extinct, then it means that the population, wait lang Kuya Reynald ha, the population of the snakes will increase. So there will be an infestation of snakes. And that is not good, number one, because it can also endanger the population of the mice. Because if we have more snakes, it means that there are more snakes who are eating mice. So it might limit the growth of these mice to the point that they will be extinct. Pag nagutom na sila at wala ng mice, there is a possibility that the snakes will now have to find another kind of food that they will be hunting instead of the mice. And of course, it's an additional danger to us kasi sabi nga ni Kadesh, some snakes are poisonous, okay? It can be a danger to us also. Sabi ni Reynald, mababawasan yung nutrients ng mushrooms, yes. So mababawasan din yung nutrients na mapupunta sa soil. So pag nabawasan yung nutrients na napunta sa soil, eventually it can also affect the growth of the grass. At pagka hindi na ganun kadami yung nag-grow na grass, maaaring magutom din yung grasshopper. So it affects all of the organisms in the food chain. Kuya Reynald, mag-i-end ang ating meeting room in less than 1 minute. So I will be calling you after natin mag-join dun sa second session. So you can add your your ideas mamaya na lang pag-join